How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great.
Good.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Vanessa Guerra. I currently serve as county clerk here in Saginaw County. So part of that includes overseeing elections, but an even bigger part is really overseeing our vital records office. So it doesn't sound very cool, but it's where everybody comes to get their birth certificates. We deal with death certificates, marriage licenses, and also circuit court records. So it's a very busy office. Prior to that, I served as state representative for the 95th district, which includes parts of Saginaw County. I served there for 6 years. And then prior to that, I served as township trustee in Bridgeport Township, which is my hometown. And township trustee is very similar to city council. So cities have city councils and townships have township boards. And so I served as a member of that board shortly after college, and also went to law school during that time, and just now reside in the city of Saginaw with my husband.
Sounds like very important.
Yeah, it's been a busy few years, but I'm really passionate about public service and being able to help people, so I've stuck with it.
Nice. Did you always want to be involved in politics? Was this always what you wanted to do?
I would say I really sort of became interested shortly after Hurricane Katrina. So, I guess even a little bit further back, I always credit my mom for making me a very sort of politically minded person. I grew up a child in the 90s, and back then they didn't have as much diversity in terms of like children's books or TV shows, things like that. So anytime my mom would find a children's book that had a brown person in it, a brown child, or if it was in Spanish, she would go out of her way to get it. And buying things off the internet in the 90s is not like it is now. So she really went out of her way to make sure I knew how important it was to see myself in positions of power and in different spaces that I might not normally see myself. And so I think that combined with the impact that Hurricane Katrina had on me and realizing that our government had really failed people pushed me to want to get involved in politics. And then certainly I also always credit the election of Barack Obama. He was a young person of color who got involved in politics and showed us all that, any of us, we don't just have to run campaigns, but we can be the candidate that runs for office too.
What made you want to go from state representative to county clerk?
That's a really good question. So part of what I noticed in the 6 years that I served as a state representative is that at the end of the day, everything comes back down to elections and who we elect to represent us, because it is those people who get to make decisions about our lives, whether that's decisions in our school districts, decisions in our county, decisions at our state level or at the federal level. It always comes down to who we elect. And so something that I'm very passionate about and something that is done in this office is increasing voter education. So that was sort of the really pillar of my campaign when I was running, was that I have committed to people that I will increase voter education here in Saginaw County so that people know not just when elections are, but also who we elect. And so whether that's hosting town halls where I invite other elected officials to come and talk to people, or just bringing greater attention to our county commission, who I work closely with, ensuring people know who these people are and what they do and how they impact our lives as citizens in this community.
When it comes to the elections you were talking about, tell me, what's it like in an election? How does it feel? Is there a lot of pressure?
Yes. So this is my first term as a county clerk, so I haven't had the ability to oversee an election. I've been on the other side, of course, as a candidate. But I did serve on the elections committee when I was in the State House. So I have watched elections as they happen, but there's a lot more work that goes into it than I think some people know, and that's part of the education, right? So you can't blame people for not knowing everything when there really hasn't been a focus on educating folks that much across our state, not just here in Saginaw County. But for example, there were a lot of accusations about voter fraud after the November 2020 election. And I think what started to come out after that is Well, there are so many steps that we might not publicize that we take to ensure security and the integrity of our elections, but every single step we take has a check and balance. So we make sure that, when the big decisions are made and even small decisions, that there's a Democrat and a Republican in the room. There's always more than one person signing off on every single thing that we do. For example, we do have an election in Saginaw County, in a community within Saginaw County in May. And last week, myself and a member of my staff, we read what would be on the ballot, because we want to make sure it had the accurate language. We didn't just read, the ballot will be, we read THE space BAL, to make sure everything was accurate, because we would never want to put anything out there that confused voters or that was inaccurate, because voting is so important in our country. And so part of what I'll be doing is educating people more on all of those steps we take to ensure the security and integrity of our elections.
There's a lot more that goes into it than people think.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, there were a lot of people who were motivated by the office holder of the presidency last fall to suggest that there were, inappropriate things happening. But there were also some people who I think genuinely just didn't know. They'd never been to what's called a board of canvassers, where we go and actually check to make sure the number of ballots that we've received matches the number of people who requested a ballot, because obviously if those numbers don't match, then we have a problem. So there were some people that genuinely didn't know, and they were getting fed all of this false information that they were torn. They didn't know what to believe. And so I do think it is our duty in the clerk's office to educate people about that.
So when those accusations came out that there was stuff happening behind the scenes that people didn't know about, like those inappropriate things going on, what did you think about that?
So having served on elections, as I mentioned, and having attended the Board of Canvassers meeting, where they really get into the nitty gritty of that, another meeting that has 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans attend it. It was frustrating, because I know how hard our local clerks work. I mean, they are on the front lines. So I want to be very clear. They do more work when it comes to our local elections. I sort of help oversee the whole process, but they are the ones that you'll see in your precinct, or when you go to request your absentee ballot or something. But they put in so many hours of work to ensure everything goes smoothly, that I think more than anything, I was frustrated that people were suggesting, these people who live in this community, right? So they live here too, suggesting that they would want to, ruin the outcome of an election in a community that they live in. What good does that do that for them or their reputation? It's very important work that they do. They realize that, and they would go to the ends of the earth. Basically, the clerks that I've met, I know, would do that to ensure that their name in their community, that the integrity is withheld or upheld.
So to those positions to run for an election, what are some requirements needed to run for office, I guess?
Yeah. So it depends a little bit on what you're running for. So for state representative, I believe the age is 18. And I should know that because I was there for 6 years. But typically 18 is the age. Obviously, if you're running for president is 34, I believe. But mostly it's just 18, live in the community that you are seeking to represent. So obviously living here in Saginaw County, I can't run for office in Bay County. But other than that, there's typically not a lot of other requirements. So for example, when I served in the State House, we had folks who had run for office who had previously been teachers. We had a couple stay-at-home moms that had decided to run for office. We had a veterinarian that decided to run, a lot of small business owners. It really varies, and that is part of the beauty of our legislature, I think, and running for office, period, in our community, is that you get to bring, your experience, no matter what it is, to your community. So even if you're a young person, and especially when I first started, a lot of people would say, well, you don't really have any experience. But the thing is, I was a young person that was going to build my life here. And so who better to want to make sure this community is a beautiful, thriving place than a person who is committed to spending their life here, right? And as a young person, I had a lot of ideas on how we could make, this community attractive to other young people. So I always tell people, don't feel like you need to have a certain sort of background or that you have to have a certain sort of degree to run for office. More than anything, you just have to have a passion for helping people is what you need.
So there's not a lot needed. People from all different places could do it?
Yeah, yep. People from all different places.
Before you were a county clerk, while you were state representative, what do you think was one of your greatest achievements that you did?
Um, Probably the one I am most proud of. I did have the opportunity to work in a bipartisan fashion with he's still our current state senator, Ken Horn, to prevent the closure of 3 schools in Saginaw County. So 2 of them were schools in the city of Saginaw, and then one of them was a school in Bridgeport. The governor at that time, Governor Snyder, had made a recommendation to close these schools and to send the children to schools in other communities. And they sent out this letter to parents, and when the parent read it, it said, your school is going to be closed and your kid's going to be sent to this other school. And sometimes the other school was a school that was like 18 miles away. And these were oftentimes already folks who were struggling with transportation and getting their kid to the school that they currently attend in their neighborhood, let alone a school district that's 16 miles away. And so the senator and I worked together to bring this to light. And more than anything, it was the community came together. The community and the school held community meetings where we took, statements from individuals so that we could share with the governor about how this was going to negatively impact the community. And we all worked together and we were able to stop that. So that was probably the most important thing.
Definitely sounds like a great accomplishment. So
Yeah.
definitely something you should be proud of. Talk to me about the process. What goes into making a law?
Yeah. So at the state level, typically what happens is, maybe I have coffee hours or held coffee hours a lot, and somebody might come to me with an issue or an idea. It doesn't always have to be a problem. It could be, we could be progressive and think about new laws, and we would flesh out what we really want that law to look like. We would do research to see if any other states already have that law, because that makes it a little bit easier to figure out how we should draft it. And then once we have an idea, I would get it drafted into an actual bill, the actual piece of paper. I would take that piece of paper around to my other colleagues in the State House, and ask them to co-sponsor it. The purpose being that the more people that co-sponsor your bill, the more people who support it, so the more likely it might actually come up for a vote. And so, you try and find people to support it, get them to sign it, and then you submit it to the legislature or the chair of whatever committee it's going to go to. And then the committee chair, though, ultimately gets to decide whether or not that bill ever gets to be heard for testimony. So we would take testimony on it before we actually voted on it. If the chair decides to hear your bill, you would go in front of a smaller group of representatives, explain your bill. If they like it, they would then vote to send it to the full House of Representatives. And at that time, we would vote on it, yes or no. Let's say we all like it, or a majority of us like it. And then the bill gets transferred over to the state Senate, where that whole process starts all over again. So again, I would have to go before a committee in the Senate, present to them. If they like it, they could then send it to the Senate, the full Senate, and then they could vote on it. If a majority like it, support the bill, then it would finally be sent to the governor. And that is in a perfect world, which almost never happens that way, because a lot of times what happens is that as it moves through the process, different people hear about it, different interest groups, and suddenly they want to either make changes, which we would call amendments. They might want to make changes to it. And every time you make a change to it, it has to go back to where it started from. So if we made a change for it in the Senate, it's got to come back over to the House to be voted on again, or vice versa. So I think a lot of times people get really frustrated because, they came to me with a bill idea, or they've been following some other bill for years and it's never become a law yet. And it takes a lot of time. I think a perfect example is the criminal expungement clean slate legislation. So legislation to help people clear their criminal records. That had been introduced since my very first term. So year 1 serving in the legislature, and did not pass until I think November of my final year. So 6 years later, it finally passed. And it's a wonderful piece of legislation, but it's crazy to think how many people could have been helped had we passed it 6 years ago,
Sounds like it's a lot that goes into it. So between you and me, this has been on my mind.
Yes.
What do you think about making a law that extends bedtimes?
That extends bedtime hours. So sometimes before the pandemic, when I used to get to go to March's reading, students would ask me that one, or they would ask me if we can make a law that the school day doesn't start until 9 a.m.
Sounds like a great law.
Yeah. So when people would ask me that one, when students would ask me that one, I would said, well, there's a school board of elected people who oversee your school. So you could talk to them about it. I mean, just because you can't vote doesn't mean that you can't share your opinion with other elected officials. And they have the power that they could change the start time of your school. Now with bedtime, your parents aren't elected officials, so they don't owe you anything. so they get to tell you when to go to bed, unfortunately.
Oh man. But I'll definitely have to get in contact with the people about that school thing. I feel like 8 o'clock is just a bit too early.
It is too early, and I think there's been a lot of research about how kids, they really sort of hit their groove a little bit later in the day, and I think they'd be more engaged if they weren't also tired, that early in the morning. So I agree.
So even though kids and people my age, even though we can't vote, how can we get involved in what you do?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of different, it kind of depends on what you're passionate about, right? So if you're really interested in elections, I would obviously encourage you to keep in touch with me. And that way, when I do things, I'd let you know, hey, this event's going on. It might be of interest to you. But I always say follow your local elected officials on Facebook. So follow your city council members. A lot of them have, official pages you can follow, or you can request their personal page. Follow your judges, all of that, because nowadays it's kind of the best way to keep up with what people are doing. But also if you have ideas or questions, you can always write to them. I would say most of us should all have our email available on our websites or our phone numbers. And you can always, if you're having an issue, or if you're not having an issue, but you have an idea, I think nearly all elected officials certainly would welcome insight from young people, even if they're not elected. And if they don't welcome it, well, that's a different problem. And that might call for election of somebody else who would welcome it.
I feel like a fresh pair of eyes could be useful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially for people who have been in office for a very long time. Naturally, you get kind of used to doing things the same way all the time. And that, and sometimes when you hear new perspectives, you start thinking differently.
So talk to me about how this whole COVID-19 pandemic, how has it affected your work?
It has greatly affected us here in the clerk's office because we're currently only open by appointment. And so a lot of times, it's human nature. When we realize we need something, it's usually not till the last minute. And so we get a lot of folks who call and they need a birth certificate by 3 p.m. today. And we look at our appointments and we're like, we're booked until like Monday of next week or something. And now we do the best that we can to work with people because we realize, it's not their fault. That's just, that's how life works. But it has made it very difficult for folks. And so we've been trying to work with people. And people are accustomed to coming to this building, into the county building, utilizing our services whenever they want. And so that's been hard on people, and we're doing the best we can to we get a lot of voicemails from folks because if they call us and we're helping people who have appointments, then we can't answer the phone. So, one day we had 78 voicemails, and that requires us to take time away from the people at the counter and call those people back and see what they need and try and help them. So it has not been good to us, but we're trying our best.
It's definitely a big a big change. I'm still getting used to seeing my classmates through screens and not like a few feet next to me at a nearby desk.
Right. You guys are going back kind of soon? Or are you doing hybrid?
I'm going to be staying on virtual, but I know some classmates who will be going back in March.
Right. Yeah. You got to do what's best for you and what you feel most comfortable with.
Absolutely. As an elected official, you're pretty smart. Do you have any last words for Swag or any bits of advice?
I am just so impressed that you've started this. I remember I first saw the article about you, and then I think I told your brother this past weekend when we set up a time to talk, you and I was so excited when I got your friend request because you're kind of a celebrity around here now. And so I was with some friends and I told them, I was like, oh my God, the Swag kid friend requested me. So I just think it's so awesome what you're doing. I hope you stick with it. When we get to elections, I would love to have you cover, what elections are going on. Because like you said, even if young people can't vote, I certainly think they can have input and they can educate their parents too. I see that happen a lot. That was sort of, when I was a kid, I couldn't vote, obviously, but I would always tell my parents, this is who I think you should vote for. And I was very fortunate to have parents who listened to me and supported me. And knew that I had, done my research, but kids can absolutely still have an impact on elections, even when they can't vote. So I just hope you keep, stick with this, and I hope that we can talk again in the future.
Thank you. You have no idea how much that means. I like the swag kid. I'm gonna have to use that one time.
Okay. I thought that was what we called you, but.
Well, thank you again for sitting down with me and doing this interview. I feel really close to you now. I feel like we're good friends.
I do too. Anytime you need anything, you want to do a voter education day, anything, let me know.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. I hope to speak with you again in the future.
Yep, take care.
You too.